wanted to be a pilot. That's what I tried to get in the Army for when I graduated from high school. I didn't have the 2-year college requirement and a couple other things to be an aviation cadet, but a recruiter sergeant talked me into getting in the service and applying from inside the service, saying you can get waivers from your commanders to make up for any deficiencies.
It did work, so you did end up getting some college experience as well?
No, I didn't get college experience. They assigned me to a tank battalion as a tank mechanic, and I went through a tank repairman school.
That's not exactly what you...
No, that's not what I started out to do. And I was up in the Barstow Desert there in California, and I was thinking, this is too hot. I don't like these noisy things, and I wanted to be in airplanes, so I applied for transfer to flight line as a flight mechanic, and they sent me to a mechanic school over at Keesler Air Force Base. 6 months, I think it was.
And what city was that in?
San Antonio, Texas.
San Antonio.
And I graduated from that and was assigned on the flight line and worked long enough to rise to staff sergeant's grade. I was a flight chief by the time my commander, that squadron commander at that time, kind of took pity on me. I was doing everything that I thought they wanted done to get their attention. I volunteered for extra duty and things like that, policing the yard. And so I went through flight mechanic school, and I was running up I was a crew chief on the P-38 and running it up every morning, and I just wanted to let it jump the chocks and take off. And my commander knew how anxious I was to actually fly one. And he found, and he started doing some personal research, and he found that there was still an old regulation on the books from World War I when they trained sergeant pilots. And they didn't require a 2-year college education. So he took my pilot's training application and converted it to the Flying Sergeants program, got it approved, and I got an appointment to the flight school as a flying sergeant.
That must have been a really exciting day for you.
Yeah, I was the only flying sergeant in the class. Everybody else was aviation cadets, and I was a aviation cadet sergeant. Because I had already been in the service, they made me a cadet officer right away. So I graduated as a second lieutenant anyway, from the sergeant program. And then because I was mechanically inclined, was already a flight mechanic on the flight line, as I was graduating, a telegram went up on the board that they were going to open a new Army Air Force flight test training program to train test pilots for the expanding service. Mm-hmm. And you had to have certain qualifications. You had to have an engineering background and things like that. That I didn't have an engineering degree or anything, but they accepted my flight training or mechanics service on a line as a suitable substitute, I suppose, because I got appointed to the pilot training program, first pilot training program that the government ran, the Air Force ran, Army Air Force. And I went through the first flight school. At that point, I flew all the aircraft that we had in the inventory, which was about 20 or 25 different kinds. And we were also, I flew a number of Navy aircraft that we had borrowed from the Navy to round out the program, because they had different performance charts.
And was this still all in San Antonio?
So, yes, still going on. The first flight test pilot school was in San Antonio also, so I just went I graduated from the cadets and advanced and went right over to the flight test pilot school and graduated from that as a flight test officer.
By the early 1940s, the entire industrialized world had manufactured millions upon millions of cars and airplanes with combustion engines, all dependent on petroleum, just as Rockefeller, Ford, and Edison had designed. An industrialized nation suddenly left without enough petroleum would go into an economic shock. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, once Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy under then-President Woodrow Wilson, always retained a very close relationship to the Navy. Roosevelt understood that the United States had an aging fleet of World War I battleships on hand that were slower and weaker than other modern navies like the Japanese had assembled throughout the 1930s. When a second engineered world war erupted in Europe as Nazi Germany invaded Poland and the British declared war on Germany, the American public wanted no part of the war,